The Mauerová case, a tale of horror and unfolding madness. In the picturesque eastern region of the Czech Republic, in a small town near Brno, a shocking and deeply unsettling story began to unravel in 2007. The Mauerová case, as it came to be known, would become one of the most disturbing cases in modern European criminal history, blending elements of family betrayal, cult-like devotion, and psychological manipulation. As the investigation unfolded, layer after layer of horror would be revealed, exposing a web of abuse and a family fractured beyond belief. Klára Mauerová seemed like an ordinary woman at first glance. A single mother of two young boys, Andrei and Jakub, she lived a quiet life and worked as a teacher. Friends and neighbors described her as polite, albeit somewhat withdrawn. Klára had been through difficult times, raising her children alone after separating from the boy's father. She had a few close friends, but her most intense connection was with her sister, Katerina Mauerová. From the outside, the Mauerovás appeared to be a typical family. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, there were strange and troubling dynamics. Klára, deeply religious and somewhat fragile, began to change after falling under the influence of a mysterious figure, Barbora Skrylová. Barbora, a 33-year-old woman with a childlike appearance due to a rare disorder that caused her to look much younger than her age, entered Klára's life in the early 2000s. Their relationship would quickly grow into something far more sinister. Barbara's appearance as a vulnerable, innocent child belied a cunning and manipulative personality. Though she posed as a young girl, her ability to control those around her became a defining factor in what was to come. Klára, who was emotionally fragile and intensely religious, became enthralled by Barbara. Seeing her as both a daughter and a savior, Klára's relationship with Barbara quickly became central to her life. Under Barbora's influence, Klára began to isolate herself from others, including her closest family and friends. Barbara, who played the role of a child named Annika to perfection, ingrained herself deeply into the family, soon becoming an unofficial member of the household. No one suspected that the innocent Annika was, in fact, an adult woman orchestrating a web of lies and control. At this point, few outside the immediate family suspected anything. Klára's increasing religiosity was strange but not alarming, and Barbara's presence as a foster child was unusual but not questioned. Yet within the house, something darker was brewing, slowly turning the family dynamic into a nightmare. In 2006, Klára decided to purchase a new home in Kurim, a small village outside of Brno. It was here, within the confines of this seemingly ordinary house, that unimaginable horror began to unfold. While Klára, Barbora, still masquerading as Annika, and the two boys moved into the house, it became a fortress of psychological and physical abuse. Barbora began to exert her control over Klára in increasingly bizarre ways. According to later court testimonies, Barbora convinced Klára that her sons needed to be disciplined to purge them of evil spirits. Klára, who was by this point utterly under Barbora's control, complied with horrific instructions. Andrei and Jakub were subjected to unimaginable abuse, beatings, starvation, and forced imprisonment. They were locked in cages, chained, and isolated for days at a time. The abuse grew worse over time. The boys were kept in a small room in the basement, subjected to beatings, and denied basic necessities. Their screams were ignored by their mother, who had become completely unhinged by Barbora's influence. Katerina, Klára's sister, was also implicated in the abuse. As the boys' cries for help went unanswered, the house became a prison of unimaginable cruelty. The beginning of the end for this house of horrors came by sheer accident. In May 2007, a neighbor in Kurim, who had installed a baby monitor in his home, began noticing strange images on his monitor. Instead of seeing his own children, he witnessed disturbing footage of a small, naked boy locked in a cage. Horrified, the neighbor immediately contacted the police, unsure of what he had stumbled upon, but certain that something was very wrong. The police arrived at the Mauerová home on May 10, 2007, expecting perhaps a misunderstanding or a case of child neglect. What they found was far worse than they could have imagined. Andrei, Klára's son, was discovered locked in a small cage in the basement, bruised, emaciated, and terrified. Jakub, his brother, showed signs of similar abuse. The police arrested Klára on the spot, and social services took the boys into protective custody. The story quickly made headlines. The public was horrified by the initial reports of abuse, but this was just the beginning. As investigators delved deeper into the Mauerová household, they would uncover a chilling series of events that defied belief. As the investigation progressed, the authorities uncovered the full extent of the abuse. It became clear that this was not just a case of a mother losing control. There was a deeper, more sinister influence at work. Klara admitted that she had been acting under the guidance of Anika, who she believed to be a vulnerable and fragile child in need of protection. But soon, the shocking truth emerged. Barbora Skrilova, the supposed child, was in fact a 33-year-old woman with a long history of psychological manipulation. She had adopted the persona of Anika to infiltrate the Mauerová family and exert control over Klara, convincing her that the boys needed to be purged through extreme methods. Barbora's manipulation extended even to convincing Klara that Anika was suffering from an illness that required her constant care. As the case developed, investigators found that the abuse wasn't limited to just the two boys. Barbora had been living a double life for years, using her appearance and psychological manipulations to gain control over vulnerable individuals. Her history was filled with stories of deception and cruelty, but this was by far the worst of her actions. Klara's defense during her trial would later hinge on her claim that she was under Barbora's control, a claim that was difficult to dismiss given Barbora's manipulative history. Yet the fact remained, she had allowed her own children to suffer unimaginable abuse under her roof. At some point during their confinement, the abuse took a darker, more sinister turn. Barbora, whose religious delusions drove the entire situation, convinced Klara that an ultimate test of the boys' spiritual purity was necessary. This test involved not only enduring suffering, but becoming participants in a ritual that would forever bind them to their penance, the consumption of human flesh. The boys had already been subjected to unimaginable physical abuse, beatings, burns, and torture, but this act was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Andrei, in particular, became the focus of this horrific ritual. In a later court testimony, he would describe the unimaginable horror of being forced to consume his own flesh, an experience so traumatic that his young mind struggled to even comprehend what was happening to him. Klara, blinded by her devotion to Barbora and her distorted beliefs, participated in the act. Under Barbora's instructions, a piece of flesh was cut from Andrei's body. Andrei, who was already weakened from days of starvation and beatings, was forced to eat it. Jakub, who witnessed the act, was similarly coerced into partaking. This grotesque and inhuman ritual would leave both boys with deep psychological wounds, ones that would take years of therapy to even begin to address. For Barbora, this act was more than just cruelty. It was the ultimate exercise of control. Forcing the boys to participate in their own degradation cemented her hold over them, reducing them to powerless objects in her twisted game. Klara, who had lost all sense of moral or maternal duty, complied without question, her mind fully enslaved to Barbora's distorted vision of religious purification. As investigators looked into Barbora Skrilova's background, they began to uncover even more disturbing connections. It was revealed that Barbora and Klara, along with a small group of other individuals, were part of a cult-like group that followed a bizarre interpretation of religious doctrines. The group, led by a man named Joseph Skrull, no confirmed relation to Barbora, though the similarity in last names raised eyebrows, practiced extreme forms of discipline and punishment in the belief that they were purging sin and evil from their followers. The cult had a small but devoted following, and Barbora played a central role in it. Her influence over Klara was tied to this religious belief system, which convinced Klara that the abuse she inflicted on her children was necessary for their spiritual salvation. The cult's members believed that through suffering, one could achieve spiritual purity. For Klara, who was already emotionally vulnerable, this belief, combined with Barbora's manipulations, led her to commit unspeakable acts. Katerina, Klara's sister, was also implicated in the cult's activities. She played a direct role in the abuse of Andrei and Jakub, and evidence would later show that she, too, had been under Barbora's control. The cult's influence was widespread, and while most of its members did not participate in the abuse of the children, it became clear that this distorted religious ideology was at the heart of the horror. As the investigation intensified, Barbora Skrylová vanished. Using her childlike appearance to her advantage, she managed to escape the authorities by assuming yet another identity. This time, she fled to Norway, where she posed as a 13-year-old boy named Adam. For months, Barbora lived under this new identity in a Norwegian children's home, continuing her charade as a vulnerable, abused child in need of protection. Her disappearance added a new level of intrigue to the case. International authorities, including Interpol, were called in to track her down, and eventually, in January 2008, she was discovered and arrested in Oslo. Her capture brought her back to the Czech Republic, where she would face trial alongside Klara, Katarina, and other members of the group. The trial of Klara Mauerová, Barbora Skrylová, Katarina Mauerová, and other involved parties began in 2008. It captivated the Czech public and drew international attention due to the bizarre and deeply disturbing nature of the case. The prosecution painted a picture of a family torn apart by manipulation, religious fanaticism, and psychological control. Klara, in her defense, maintained that she had been brainwashed by Barbora, who she believed to be a child in need of protection. She expressed remorse for what had happened to her sons, but her testimony was riddled with contradictions, and many found it difficult to believe that she could have been so completely unaware of what was happening. Barbora, for her part, denied the charges and claimed that she had been a victim of the cult as well. Her defense portrayed her as a mentally disturbed individual who had been caught up in the same manipulative environment as the Mauerová family. But her long history of deception and control worked against her in court, and the jury found her culpable in the abuse. Katarina, Klara's sister, was also convicted for her role in the abuse, though she maintained that she had acted under Barbora's influence. In the end, Klara Mauerová was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Barbora Skrylová received a 5-year sentence, and Katarina was sentenced to 10 years. Other individuals associated with the cult received various sentences as well. The Mauerová case left a lasting scar on the Czech Republic. It raised deep questions about the vulnerabilities of people to manipulation, especially within the confines of family and religious belief. Andrei and Jakub were placed in foster care after their rescue and underwent years of therapy to recover from the abuse they endured. The case highlighted the dangers of unchecked cult-like behavior and the psychological control that some individuals can exert over others. For many, the Mauerová case served as a chilling reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the lengths to which people can go when they fall under the influence of a manipulative and controlling figure. Barbora Skrylová, with her childlike appearance and adult mind, represented a rare but terrifying form of predator, one who could use her own apparent vulnerability to wreak havoc on the lives of others. The Mauerová case remains one of the most horrifying criminal cases in European history, a tragic story of a mother, her children, and a manipulative stranger who shattered their lives forever.